It was a bright morning when the new student arrived at the school, and it was clear from the first moment that she didn't quite fit in. The school gates, usually open for the privileged students, felt like a barrier today. The sun glared off. The shining marble floors of the hallways as the students filed in, rich kids who had been here for years, walking with a sense of pride in their posture. For the rest of them, this place was home. For her, it was just the beginning of what could easily feel like a nightmare. Her fingers trembled as she clutched the strap of her backpack. She looked around, trying to absorb everything. The towering, white walls, the polished floors that reflected her every move. She couldn't help but feel out of place. Everyone here had the latest gadgets, designer clothes, and expensive shoes. Meanwhile, she had nothing but a worn-out coat and shoes that were a size too big. It wasn't the first time she had been in a new place. But this school was different. It wasn't just a new city or a new foster home. This was the school. The kind of school where you had to be someone special to even be allowed in, let alone accepted. She had only recently moved in with her new foster parents, people who seemed nice enough but had their own children who went to this school. It was through a sort of chance that she even got the opportunity to attend here. It wasn't that they took pity on her, but when a scholarship came available for foster kids, it seemed like her chance to escape her old life, just make it through, she thought to herself. Just survive here. As she walked through the hallways, the whispers and stares from students made her feel small, almost invisible. She had been prepared for it, but it still stung. She tried to keep her head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might be tempted to say something rude or ask questions. She didn't feel like answering. It wasn't long before she was led into the music room for her first class. Music had always been a safe space for her, even in the worst of times. In every foster home, there had been a piano, or at least, that was the one thing she could always count on. The piano was the one thing that made her feel like she belonged, even when she had nowhere else to go. She pushed open the door to the music room, and as soon as she stepped inside, she felt a wave of nervousness wash over her. She wasn't prepared for what she saw. The room was beautiful. There were grand pianos, string instruments neatly placed in their stands, and rows of shelves full of music sheets. The students already sitting there had a confident air about them, as if they belonged, as if this was their world, and she was just an outsider walking in uninvited. She was shown to a seat in front of a piano nothing like the ones in the corner with the shiny finishes. No, her piano looked as though it had seen better days. It had missing keys, a cracked surface, and the pedals made a strange noise when she tested them. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, just to get a feel for it. She wasn't surprised. It was obvious she wasn't going to be given the best instruments here. A teacher walked in, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. She had a stern expression, almost as though she were judging every student as they entered. She glanced at the piano, and then at the girl, offering a curt nod. "Start practicing," the teacher said, her voice cold. "Competition's coming up. You'll need to keep up." The girl nodded, though inside she felt a growing knot in her stomach. She had heard about the competition. It was a big deal here, something that everyone talked about. Winning would bring praise, respect, and maybe even a scholarship. But with this broken piano, how could she possibly compete? As she sat there, testing the keys, she saw others around her. Some students were already playing beautiful melodies, their fingers dancing over the keys like they were born to play. They looked so comfortable here, so at ease with their talent, their surroundings, their wealth. It felt like she was the only one out of place. That's when she noticed one student in particular. She was sitting at one of the grand pianos, her back straight and her fingers flying across the keys. The sound that filled the room was pure, flawless. There was no hesitation in her movements, no uncertainty. It was as if the piano was an extension of herself. She stopped playing for a moment and glanced up, noticing the new girl watching her. A small, knowing smile played on her lips. The other students who had been watching her performance didn't seem to notice or care that someone was watching. But for some reason, the new girl felt like an outsider in a different way. They were all here for the same reason, the competition. But already, it was clear who the real competition was. The girl at the grand piano was well known here. She had been the top performer for years, the one everyone looked up to. She was the favorite to win. The girl hadn't even had to work hard for it. Her talent was natural, effortless. No one ever really challenged her, and as far as most students were concerned, that was the way it was supposed to be. The new girl had heard whispers about her, already how perfect she was, how everyone expected her to win. It made her feel small, insignificant. She couldn't help but wonder if she even had a chance. After all, the competition was fierce, and she had no idea how she would measure up. The teacher walked by her again and paused, glancing at the piano she was sitting at. She didn't say anything, but the message was clear. This piano wasn't for someone who mattered. The unspoken feeling was that the girl didn't matter. Not like the others did. The girl stared at the keys in front of her, taking a deep breath. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room on her, but she refused to look up. Instead, she began to play softly at first, just to get used to the broken piano. She had learned to play in far worse conditions. It was the one thing in her life that had always stayed the same, no matter how bad things had gotten. She could find a way to make this piano work. She had to, but no matter how much she practiced, the sound didn't come out the way she wanted. The notes were off. The piano didn't respond the way she needed it to. The pedals screeched with every press. She pushed through, telling herself that maybe it wasn't about perfection. Maybe it was about doing her best, no matter the odds. As the bell rang and students began to leave for their next classes, she stood up, feeling a sense of uncertainty wash over her. What was she even doing here? She wasn't like these people. She didn't have their wealth, their history, or their connections. All she had was a broken piano and a hope that somehow that would be enough. She walked out of the room, looking back one last time at the piano. The other students passed her without a glance. She didn't belong here, but that didn't matter. She was going to make sure that, by the end of it all, they'd know her name. She'd prove to herself and to everyone else that she was more than just a foster kid in a broken piano. She just had to find a way to make it work. The days that followed weren't much different from the first. Every morning felt like stepping into a world that wasn't meant for her, and every class only seemed to reinforce the idea that she didn't belong. She had always known what it felt like to be different. It was something she was used to. But here, at this school, the difference was so much more obvious. The other students moved in groups, their conversations filled with talk of trips to Europe, private lessons, and the latest gadgets they owned. It felt like they lived in a world she could never touch. And then there was the piano competition. It was the big event of the year, the one that everyone was talking about. The winner would get a full scholarship and be hailed as the best musician in the school. For most of the students, it was just another contest to prove who was the most talented. For her, it felt like the one chance she might have to finally make her mark. She had heard whispers in the halls about the competition. Some students already had their eyes set on the prize, and others were just waiting for their chance to be crowned the next piano champion. Among them, there was one name that always came up, the girl who had won the competition for the last few years running. She had never seen her up close until now. The girl was always surrounded by her group of friends, and when she played, it was like magic. Her fingers moved over the keys with such grace and the sound that came from the piano was pure and beautiful. No one doubted she would win again this year. The new girl had already heard the rumors. How perfect the reigning champion was. How effortless her performances seemed. Everyone said she was born to play, that the piano was in her blood. It was. Hard not to feel a bit intimidated by that, especially when she had to play on a broken piano. But the thought of not trying at all was even worse, Dot. So, with the competition in the back of her mind, she continued to practice, even though the piano didn't seem to cooperate. Some of the keys were sticky, some barely worked at all. The pedals squeaked loudly every time she pressed down. But she didn't let that stop her. She played as best as she could, adjusting to the broken instrument as best she could. Every mistake made her more determined. She was used to things not being perfect. This was nothing new, Dot. As the days passed, she spent more and more time in the music room, practicing whenever she could. She played before school, during lunch, and even after the last bell rang. The teachers would sometimes give her strange looks, probably wondering why she kept playing on a broken piano when there were perfectly fine ones available. But they never offered her one of the better instruments, and she never asked. She knew better than to complain. One afternoon, after a long day of classes, she found herself back in the music room, alone. The halls were empty now, and she was the only one left. The quietness of the room made her feel more at ease. She sat down at her piano and began to play the song she had been working on for days. It wasn't a complex piece, but it meant something to her. The music was soft, flowing, and it had an emotion to it that seemed to match how she felt. A mix of hope, sadness, and determination. As her fingers danced over the keys, she began to lose track of time. For a moment, everything around her faded away, and it was just her and the music. But her peace didn't last long. She heard the sound of heels clicking against the floor, and she looked up to see one of the teachers standing at the door, watching her. "Still here?" the teacher asked with a raised eyebrow. The girl nodded quietly, embarrassed that someone had caught her playing when no one was around. "You know," the teacher continued, "you might want to try one of the grand pianos in the other room. They sound much better than this one." She could feel the teacher's eyes on her, the unspoken judgment in the air. The message was clear. Why bother with this old, broken piano when you could be playing on something far better? But she didn't respond. She just smiled weakly and said, "I'm fine, thank you." The teacher didn't push it, and after a few more seconds, she left, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she walked away. The girl stared at the broken piano in front of her. She could hear the words the teacher had said echoing in her mind. Why bother? That question lingered with her long after the teacher had gone. Why bother? It wasn't as if anyone cared about the broken piano. It wasn't as if anyone cared about her either. But then something inside her stirred. No, she thought. I'll make it work. I'll show them. She went back to playing, but this time she played with more purpose. She pushed the mistakes aside, playing through the imperfections. She focused on the music, on the way the piano made her feel, not on how it sounded. Slowly, the music began to feel more like a part of her. It wasn't about the piano. It was about her. That night, after hours of practice, she found herself more determined than ever. The competition was getting closer, and she knew she had to be ready. But more than that, she knew that no matter what happened, she wasn't going to let anyone else decide her worth. If they were going to judge her, they would have to do it based on her music, not on the broken piano she had to play in the days that followed. She continued to practice. She learned to play through the imperfections, to work with the broken parts of the piano instead of against them. She even began to experiment, using the sticky keys and the broken pedals in ways she never thought possible. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. It was a sound no one else could replicate. And then, the day of the competition came. She had been waiting for this moment, not because she thought she would win, but because it felt like the final step in proving to herself that she was capable. The other students had already gathered in the competition hall, all of them in their fancy clothes, looking like they were born to be there. Some of them were already playing their pieces, their fingers moving quickly over the keys with no hesitation. She felt out of place, standing there in her old jacket, her worn shoes, and her nervous hands. But as she stood there, watching the others, something shifted inside her. She wasn't one of them. But she wasn't going to let that stop her. She wasn't going to let them decide how her story would end. It was her turn to perform now. She walked up to the stage, took a deep breath, and sat down at the broken piano that had been her companion all along. The audience quieted, and the lights on her shone bright, making the room feel warmer than it had before. For a moment, she almost froze. But then she closed her eyes and began to play. The sound wasn't perfect. The piano creaked, the keys felt stiff, and the pedals squeaked with every press. But as she played, the music began to fill the room. It was messy, it was raw, but it was real. She wasn't trying to be perfect. She was just playing from her heart. When the final note rang out, she opened her eyes and looked up. The audience was silent for a moment. But then, one by one, the applause started. It wasn't thunderous, but it was real. It was genuine. And, for the first time since she had walked through the gates of the school, she felt like she belonged. The days leading up to the competition felt like a blur. The air seemed heavier, and the halls of the school echoed with the murmurs of excitement and anticipation. Every student seemed to be talking about the same thing: who would win this year's piano competition. The best pianists in the school were preparing their pieces, each one determined to come out on top. She had heard all the whispers. She knew who the favorites were. There were the kids whose parents had hired private tutors for years, the ones who spent hours a day practicing. The girl who had won the competition the past 3 years, everyone said she was unbeatable. She had talent, no doubt about it, but it wasn't just her talent that made her a threat. It was her confidence. She had everything, it seemed, and everyone knew it. But the girl with the broken piano didn't care about that. At least she tried not to. There were still moments, though, when doubt crept in. Sometimes, when she stood in the hallways and saw other students walking by, their heads high with their fancy clothes and their flawless confidence, she couldn't help but feel like an outsider. She felt like she didn't belong here, like she was just pretending to be a part of something she could never really be a part of. She spent most of her time in the music room, practicing. Sometimes, when the room was quiet and empty, she'd let herself play a little bit of something just for herself. Music was the one place where she felt safe, where she could just let everything go. It didn't matter what was happening around her, what anyone else thought. It was just the piano, her fingers, and the sound that filled the room. The broken piano, with its stiff keys and squeaky pedals, had become an extension of her. She had learned its quirks, its flaws. Each note that came out of it, no matter how imperfect, felt like a small victory. She was making the best of it, and that was all she could do. But then there were the days when it felt like the piano wasn't enough. She'd sit at the bench, her fingers ready to press the keys, and suddenly the weight of everything would hit her. The pressure to compete, the uncertainty of her place here, the fear that maybe she wasn't good enough, it all came rushing in at once. She'd think about the competition, about the students who had spent years perfecting their craft, and she'd wonder how she could possibly compete with them. How could she go up against people who had everything, when all she had was this old broken piano? She could feel her chest tighten, her hands shaking as she stared at the keys. She'd close her eyes and take a deep breath. Just play, she told herself. Play the music, not the competition. And so she did. She played her heart out, pushing through the doubts, focusing only on the music in front of her. She let herself get lost in it, feeling the rhythm and the melody, letting the imperfections of the piano fade into the background. One day, while she was practicing, she heard footsteps behind her. She paused, expecting it to be a teacher or another student who had wandered into the room. But when she turned around, she was surprised to see one of the students she recognized from the halls. The girl, who had always been surrounded by her friends, was standing there, watching her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The girl just stood there, arms crossed, looking at her piano. The new girl felt her heart race. She didn't know what to expect. This wasn't someone she'd expected to pay any attention to her. She felt exposed, vulnerable. "I didn't know anyone still played that piano," the other girl said, finally breaking the silence. Her tone wasn't harsh, but it wasn't exactly friendly either. It was more like a casual observation, as if the idea of playing on a broken piano was just strange to her. The new girl nodded, unsure of how to respond. "It's fine," she said quietly, hoping her voice didn't betray the nerves she was feeling. "I've gotten used to it." The other girl looked at the piano, her eyes lingering on the worn-out keys, then turned back to her. "It must be hard," she said, almost as if she were trying to be kind, but it didn't quite come across that way. "I mean, with all the others using the good instruments, it must be frustrating." The new girl swallowed, suddenly feeling like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. "It's not so bad," she said quickly, trying to brush it off. "It's not about the piano. It's about the music." For a moment, the other girl said nothing. Then, with a small sigh, she walked closer to the bench. "I don't know how you do it," she said, almost under her breath. "I can't stand playing on anything less than perfect." The new girl felt a flicker of something. Was it sympathy? Or was it something else? The girl had made it clear that she didn't quite understand. But there was something in her tone that made it sound like she was trying to relate. In her own way. "Music isn't about the perfect instrument," the new girl said, her voice more confident now. "It's about how you make it sound, how you feel it." The other girl didn't respond right away, but she seemed to think about what the new girl had said. She stood there for a moment, looking at the broken piano again. The new girl wasn't sure what to make of it. Was she being judged? Or was she being listened to? Then, to her surprise, the other girl nodded. "I guess I see what you mean," she said, her voice softer than before. "Maybe I've been focusing too much on getting everything perfect." The new girl wasn't sure what to say to that, so she just smiled, though it was small. The other girl turned and walked out of the room without saying anything else. The new girl was left staring at the piano, wondering if she had just imagined the whole conversation. Had that really just happened? The rest of the day passed quickly, and soon the competition was only a few days away. The new girl couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. It wasn't just the pressure to win. It was the pressure to prove that she was worthy of being here at all. The students who had been at the school for years already had their groups, their friends, their place. She was still the outsider, the girl who didn't quite belong, but in the quiet moments, when it was just her and the piano, she could feel something shifting. She wasn't going to let the broken piano, or the doubts, or the judgment of others define her. She was going to play, no matter what. She was going to pour everything she had into the music, and if it wasn't perfect, that was okay. It would be hers. The morning of the competition, she woke up earlier than usual. She felt a mix of excitement and nerves, but she couldn't let herself feel too nervous. This was her moment to show everyone what she was made of. It didn't matter what the other students had. It didn't matter that she didn't have a grand piano or a perfect piece. All that mattered was what she could do with what she had. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and let herself focus. This was her time. She was going to make it count. When the time came for her to take the stage, she walked to the piano with steady steps. The bright lights of the stage seemed to spotlight everything she had worked for. The other students watched from their seats, their eyes on her. She could feel their stares, but she didn't let them shake her. She sat at the piano and took a moment to steady herself. The keys were the same as they always had been, broken, imperfect, but she didn't care. She had come this far. She wasn't going to stop now. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The moment she sat down at the piano on the day of the competition, everything around her seemed to blur. The bright lights above her, the quiet buzz of whispers from the audience, the quiet shuffle of feet on the floor, it all faded into the background. For a brief second, it felt like she was the only one in the room. Her fingers hovered over the keys, feeling the cool, worn surface beneath her fingertips. She had practiced this song countless times, each note etched into her memory. The broken piano she had spent months playing on was familiar to her now. Even if it wasn't perfect, it was hers. Every squeak, every sticky key, it was a part of the music, a part of her journey. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first few notes were soft, hesitant at first, but they were steady. She closed her eyes and let the music flow. It didn't matter how many times she had played this piece, she still felt the same way every time. The piano might have been broken, but the music still poured out of her heart. With every chord, she felt herself letting go of the tension that had built up over the weeks of practice. The broken piano squeaked with every press of the pedal, but she didn't mind. She didn't even notice anymore. It was part of the sound, part of the rhythm. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She wasn't here to prove anything to anyone else. She was here because this was her moment, her music, her story. She let herself get lost in the melody, her hands moving over the keys almost instinctively. The song was a reflection of everything she had gone through, the uncertainty, the loneliness, the pressure to be perfect, the determination to keep going despite it all. As she played, it felt like the music was telling the story for her, telling the audience everything she had experienced without her saying a word. When she reached the bridge of the song, she could feel herself starting to pour more emotion into it. The pace quickened, the sound more urgent, and with every note, she felt like she was releasing the weight of all the doubt that had followed her. Throughout this journey, the squeaky pedals and uneven keys faded away in her mind as she focused entirely on the music. She wasn't thinking about the other contestants. She wasn't thinking about what the audience thought. She wasn't thinking about how she didn't belong in this fancy school with these perfect kids. All that mattered now was the music. As the song reached its climax, she found herself playing with more energy. The piano seemed to come alive in her hands, responding to her every movement. She knew she had found her rhythm, her own way of playing, her own unique sound. The imperfections didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling that the music gave her, the sense of freedom, of release, of finally being herself. She could hear the soft hum of the crowd as she played, but it didn't throw her off. If anything, it pushed her to play even harder, to give everything she had. The competition was a distant thought now. She wasn't here to compete with anyone but herself. And then, as the final note rang out, the room fell silent. For a long moment, she just sat there, her hands resting on the keys, feeling the vibration of the sound still lingering in the air. She opened her eyes slowly, almost unwilling to break the stillness. She had finished. The applause was slow at first, unsure, but it grew louder as more people began to clap. She wasn't sure if they were clapping because they truly understood what she had just done, or if it was just out of politeness, but it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that she had played her heart out. She had done her best, and she had been true to herself. She stood up from the piano, her legs feeling shaky, and took a deep breath. She was surprised by how calm she felt. For the first time since she had walked into this school, she didn't feel like an outsider. She had just played her story, and in doing so, she had found a connection with something greater than herself. The music dot, as she left the stage, she passed the other students who had already performed. They were busy talking amongst themselves. But she didn't let that bother her. She had done what she came to do. She had shared her music with the world. Everything else was secondary. For the next few hours, the competition continued, and she found herself sitting in the back of the room waiting for the results. The other students who had performed seemed confident. They chatted and laughed, discussing their pieces and their scores. Some of them didn't even seem nervous, like they were already certain they would win. She tried to ignore the whispers around her, but it was hard. She couldn't help but overhear the conversations. The girl who had won the competition for the past few years was sitting near her, talking about how she had nailed her performance. "I think this is going to be my year again," she said, with a confident smile, not even looking at the new girl. The new girl felt a pang of discomfort. She couldn't help but wonder if she had any chance at all. She had played her heart out, but would it be enough? Would the judges see the passion in her performance? Or would they just look at her and the broken piano and think she wasn't good enough? She pushed the thoughts away. It didn't matter. The music was what mattered. The rest was out of her control. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the results were announced. The room fell silent as the judges took their places at the front. One by one, they began to call out the names of the top performers, starting with third place. Then second. As each name was called, the tension in the room grew thicker. And then they called first place. Her heart skipped a beat. The first name was read aloud, and it wasn't hers. She had expected that. Of course, it wasn't her. She didn't belong in that world of perfect scores and private lessons. But as she heard the name of the winner, she couldn't help but feel a small sting of disappointment. She had given everything she had, and yet it wasn't enough. But then, to her surprise, there was another announcement. "Before we end, we'd like to make a special mention to one of the participants who may not have won, but whose performance stood out in a way that was impossible to ignore," the head judge said, looking around the room. The new girl felt a lump rise in her throat. This wasn't happening. There was no way they were talking about her. She was just another kid with a broken piano. But then the judge said her name. The room went quiet. She could feel the eyes of every student on her. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to stand out in this way. She wasn't supposed to be noticed, but they had noticed her. They had noticed the way she played, the emotion she poured into every note. They had noticed that she didn't give up, even when everything seemed stacked against her. She stood up slowly, her heart racing, and made her way to the front. The applause was hesitant at first, but then it grew stronger, louder. It was real this time. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was genuine. She wasn't the winner. But in that moment, she felt like she had won something even more important. Respect. She had earned it, not through perfect technique or flawless execution, but through her heart, her determination, and her music. The next few days passed by in a blur. The girl found herself walking through the hallways with a different kind of confidence, one she hadn't expected to feel. The competition was over, but something had changed inside of her. She no longer felt like the outsider, the one who didn't belong. For the first time since she had come to this school, she felt like she was a part of something. Even if she didn't have the perfect piano or the best technique, she had found her own voice. The recognition she received after the competition didn't hurt either. It wasn't the first place trophy, but it felt just as important. The judges had called her performance special. They had recognized her for what she had done, not for what she lacked. And that meant more than any award could ever do. The days after the competition were a mix of emotions. She still struggled with the idea that she wasn't good enough, that maybe the other students were better in so many ways. But every time she sat down at her broken piano, she reminded herself that the imperfections didn't matter. The music was what mattered. She had something to say, and that was what counted. That one afternoon, while sitting in the music room, she heard footsteps approach the door. It was one of the teachers, a woman who had been watching her throughout the competition. The girl had always been a little intimidated by her, thinking that she was too perfect to even talk to. But today, the teacher's expression was warm, and her eyes held something that the girl hadn't seen before: admiration. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" the teacher asked, stepping into the room. The girl nodded, unsure of what to expect. "Of course." The teacher smiled and walked over to the piano. She took a seat beside her. "I wanted to tell you something," she began, her voice gentle but firm. "You have something that most students don't have. I saw it in your performance. You don't just play the notes. You play the music. You feel it in a way that's rare." The girl was quiet for a moment, taking in the words. "Thank you," she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it completely. She still couldn't shake the feeling that her performance had been far from perfect. "I know it's not always easy," the teacher continued, "especially in a place like this, where everyone is focused on technique and perfection. But that's not the most important thing in music. It's about what you bring to the table, your emotion, your story. And you did that." The girl felt her heart swell. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever noticed how much she poured into her music. She thought about how many times she had been overlooked, how many times she had doubted herself. But here, in this moment, the teacher was telling her that she was doing something right. "You're going to go far," the teacher said, her voice full of certainty. "You have the ability to do things with your music that others can't. You just need to keep trusting yourself." The girl couldn't help but smile, a little shy but full of gratitude. It wasn't the first place trophy, but it was more meaningful. For once, she didn't feel like she was just a foster kid who didn't belong. She felt like she had earned her place. As the weeks went by, things started to feel more normal. The girl wasn't spending every waking moment thinking about the competition. She continued to practice, but now it wasn't out of fear of not being good enough. It was because she loved it. It was because she wanted to play, to express herself, to be herself. One day, she found herself walking through the school courtyard, on her way to the music room, when she noticed a small group of students gathered. Around, they were laughing, talking animatedly. Normally, she would have passed by, keeping her head down, trying to stay unnoticed. But today, something felt different. She slowed down and hesitated for a moment. One of the students in the group looked over and caught her eye. Without thinking, the girl took a step toward them. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice tentative but curious. The students looked up, and for the first time, they didn't just glance at her and turn away. Instead, they smiled. "We were just talking about the competition," one of them said. "You were amazing. Seriously, we all thought you were going to win. Your performance was different. It was real." The girl felt her stomach do a flip. She wasn't used to compliments, especially not from the popular kids. But here they were, standing in front of her, saying something kind. "Thank you," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. She wasn't used to being recognized like this. It felt strange, but another student, the one who had been the most vocal during the competition, spoke up. "You know, you made us all rethink our own performances," she said. "You showed that it's not about being perfect. It's about how you connect with the music. You made it seem effortless, even though we all know it wasn't." The girl couldn't believe what she was hearing. "I didn't think I was that good," she admitted, looking down at her hands, feeling a little self-conscious. "Are you kidding?" One of the other students said, "You were better than all of us. You didn't care about showing off. You just played, and that made it real." The girl didn't know what to say. She had always been told that to succeed, she had to be perfect, to do everything exactly right. But here they were, telling her that being real was enough. She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of warmth spread through her chest. "I didn't think I belonged here," she said quietly, "but I guess ... maybe I do." One of the students stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Of course you do," she said. "You belong here just as much as any of us. Maybe more." The girl smiled, feeling a rush of emotion she wasn't sure how to handle. She had always felt like an outsider, but maybe she had been wrong all along. Maybe she didn't need to be perfect to belong. Maybe all she had to do was be herself. As the group of students began to disperse, one of them gave her a friendly wave. "We should all hang out sometime," she said. "It'd be cool to get to know you better." The girl waved back, her heart racing with surprise. She didn't know what to think. Was this really happening? Were they really interested in getting to know her? Over the next few weeks, things started to shift. The girl found herself being included in more conversations, more activities. She was no longer the invisible foster kid in the corner. She was becoming a part of something. She was starting to make friends, not because she was trying to fit in, but because she had let herself be who she was. She even found herself laughing with the other students, something she hadn't done in a long time. They weren't just classmates anymore. They were becoming her peers, her friends. And it was all because she had decided to stop trying to be perfect and just started playing the music that was in her heart. One afternoon, after school, she was sitting at the broken piano in the music room when the teacher came in again. This time, the teacher didn't sit down beside her. Instead, she stood by the door, watching her play. "You know," the teacher said, "I think you've found something important. You've stopped trying to be what everyone else wants you to be. You're just being you, and that's more powerful than anything." The girl stopped playing and looked up at the teacher. "I think I'm starting to understand that," she said, her voice steady. "I don't need to be perfect. I just need to be real." The teacher smiled, a proud look on her face. Exactly. For the first time, the girl felt like she had truly found her place. She wasn't trying to fit into a mold anymore. She was creating her own. And that, she realized, was the best thing she could do. The months passed, and as the seasons shifted, so did the girl's life at the school. What had once felt like a battle every day, trying to fit in, trying to prove herself, had become a journey of self-discovery. She was no longer that shy, anxious girl who sat in the back of the classroom, afraid of being noticed. She had learned to embrace who she was and what she had to offer. She had found her voice, both in music and in life. It wasn't always easy, though. There were still moments when she doubted herself, when the weight of being the new kid threatened to pull her down. But those moments were shorter now. She had a community around her, friends who had come to see her not just as the girl with the broken piano, but as someone with something real to share. She still played on that old piano, its keys sticking and squeaking with every note, but it didn't matter anymore. It was part of her story, part of the music she created. Every time she sat down to play, it was as if she was reminding herself of how far she had come, how much she had grown. One afternoon, the school announced an upcoming music recital. It was a tradition, one of the biggest events of the year, where students from every grade showed off their skills. The competition wasn't as intense as the last one, but it was still a big deal. The girl thought about it for a moment. Her first instinct was to shy away from it, to let the other students take the spotlight. But then she stopped herself. Why should she hide? She had earned her place here. She had something to share, and this was her chance to show everyone what she could do. She signed up, not sure what to expect, but feeling a sense of quiet determination. This wasn't about winning or impressing anyone. This was about sharing the music that had become a part of her, about expressing herself in a way she never thought possible. When she first arrived at the school, the days leading up to the recital were filled with practice, but this time it didn't feel like work. The girl was eager to play, eager to connect with the music. She no longer felt the need to be perfect, and it freed her in ways she hadn't imagined. Each time she played, she was telling a story. It wasn't just about the notes anymore. It was about what those notes meant, about the emotions they carried. Her friends, the ones who had supported her throughout this journey, were excited for her. They had seen her struggle, had witnessed her moments of doubt, but they had also seen the way she had pushed through it all. They had seen how much she had changed, how she had transformed from someone who hid in the shadows into someone who was willing to stand in the light. On the day of the recital, the girl stood backstage, waiting for her turn. The auditorium was buzzing with energy. Students were chatting, tuning their instruments, and adjusting their outfits. She could feel the nerves in her stomach, the familiar anxiety creeping up on her. But it wasn't as intense as it had been before. It wasn't the crippling fear that used to hold her back. It was more of a gentle excitement, a sense of anticipation that made her smile. Her name was called, and she walked onto the stage, her heart beating a little faster with each step. The spotlight was bright, and she could see the rows of students and teachers sitting in the audience. She took a deep breath, remembering the teacher's words. Just be you? That's enough. She sat down at the piano and placed her hands on the keys. The familiar sound of the squeaky pedals and the uneven keys greeted her, but it didn't matter. She didn't need a perfect piano to make beautiful music. What mattered was what she brought to the music, the emotion she poured into it. She started to play, her fingers moving over the keys with a confidence that surprised her. The song she had chosen wasn't the most complicated piece. It wasn't a show-off piece that required technical skill. Instead, it was a song that spoke to her, one that carried the message she wanted to share. As she played, she could feel the music flowing through her. It wasn't just a series of notes strung together. It was a story, her story told through sound. The ups and downs, the joy and the pain, the moments of doubt and the moments of strength. Each note carried a piece of her heart, a piece of her journey. The audience was quiet, and she could feel their attention on her. For the first time, it didn't make her nervous. It felt like they were listening, not just to the music, but to her. And that was all she could ask for. When the last note of the song rang out, the room was still. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. And then the applause began. It wasn't loud or thunderous, but it was sincere. She stood up from the piano, feeling a rush of emotions that she wasn't sure how to handle. She had done it. She had played her heart out, and the audience had heard her as she left the stage. She could see her friends in the crowd, waving at her and smiling. They had believed in her from the beginning, and now she had shown them and herself what she was capable of. The rest of the recital passed in a blur. She wasn't thinking about the other performances or how she compared to anyone else. She had done what she set out to do. She had shared her music, and that was enough. After the recital, the girl felt lighter, freer. She didn't need validation anymore. She had already found something much more important: acceptance from herself. She no longer felt the need to hide, to be perfect. She had discovered that being true to herself was the most powerful thing she could do. In the days that followed, the girl's confidence continued to grow. She found herself laughing more, talking to others with ease, and embracing the opportunities that came her way. She no longer felt like the outsider. She was a part of this community now, and that was a powerful feeling. The teacher who had supported her all along came up to her one afternoon after class. "You did a wonderful job," the teacher said, her voice warm. "I knew you had it." "In you?" The girl smiled, feeling a sense of pride she had never felt before. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. "I think you've learned something important," the teacher continued. "It's not about being the best or having the most perfect technique. It's about being true to yourself. You found that, and that's what will carry you forward." The girl nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. She knew the teacher was right. She had found her place, not in perfection, but in authenticity. She had found strength in her flaws, and it had made her stronger than she ever imagined. In the months that followed, the girl continued to grow, both as a musician and as a person. She learned to trust herself, to embrace her imperfections, and to see the beauty in her unique story. She no longer needed anyone's approval to feel good about herself. She had learned that the only approval she truly needed was her own. And as she sat at her broken piano, playing her heart out, she realized that this was what it meant to truly belong, to be seen, to be heard, and to be proud of who you are, imperfections and all.